There is an island you can drive across in a single afternoon. It is smaller than the state of Maryland. From the window of a passing plane, it looks like nothing. A green ridge of mountains, a crowded coastline, a smear of cloud over the Pacific. You could pass over it without a second thought, and yet almost everything you touch today passed through it first. The phone on your desk, the laptop you opened this morning, the car in your driveway, the card reader at the coffee shop, the servers running the artificial intelligence that is quietly rewriting entire industries. None of it begins in Silicon Valley. It begins here, on this one island, in a handful of buildings most people will never see, behind glass and filtered air and machines that cost more than airliners. The island is Taiwan. And the uncomfortable truth, the one that keeps defense planners awake in Washington and Beijing alike, is simple. If Taiwan vanished tomorrow, millions of people would still wake up. They would still go to work. The sun would still rise over the Pacific. But within weeks, modern civilization would begin to slow. And then, system by system, it would begin to stop. The factories that build the world's cars, the companies racing to build artificial intelligence, the supply of the most advanced processors on Earth. All of it traces back through a chain most people have never thought about to this single point on the map. This is not a story about a war, not yet. It is a story about dependence, the most extreme concentration of technological power the world has ever built into a single point on a map. And the strangest part is how few people noticed it happening. For most of human history, the things that ran the world were spread out. Grain came from 100 valleys. Coal came from 1,000 mines. Oil, even oil, the lifeblood of the 20th century, pooled under dozens of nations across 4 continents. If one source failed, others remained. Redundancy was built into the planet itself. The 21st century broke that pattern. The most important substance in the modern economy is not oil. It is the advanced semiconductor, the microscopic chip etched with billions of transistors, each one thousands of times thinner than a human hair. It is the thing that thinks inside every machine we have come to depend on. And the most advanced of those chips are made overwhelmingly in one place. Not in America, not in Europe, not in China. Here. Think of it as a choke point. History is full of them. A mountain pass, a narrow strait, a single bridge, and an entire army has to cross. Whoever controls the choke point controls everything that flows through it. For 2,000 years, those choke points were geography. Places you could see on a map and fortify with walls. Today, the most dangerous choke point in the world is not a place at all. It is a capability, the ability to manufacture the brain of the modern machine. And it sits on an island that another superpower claims as its own, separated from the mainland by a strip of water barely 100 miles wide. So the question is not really whether Taiwan makes chips. Everyone knows it makes chips. That part is on the label of half the devices in your home. The question is the one that almost nobody stops to ask. Why does one island, this island, end up holding the modern world in its hands? How did a place that began as a refuge for a defeated army become the single most indispensable piece of territory on the planet? And what would it actually cost the rest of us if it were ever taken away? To understand that, we have to go back to a defeated army, a fleeing leader, and a promise made as the coast of China disappeared in 1949. In the winter of 1949, a man stood on the deck of a ship watching the coast of China disappear behind him. His name was Chiang Kai-shek, and he had just lost the largest country on Earth. For more than 2 decades, Chiang had led the nationalist government of China in a brutal contest for control of the mainland, first against warlords, then against the Japanese occupation, and finally against the communist forces of Mao Zedong. By 1949, that contest was over. Mao had won. And Chiang, with the remnants of his army, much of his government, and a substantial share of the nation's gold reserves, retreated across 100 miles of water to a single island the Japanese had ruled for half a century and called Formosa. He told his followers it was temporary, a regrouping. They would gather their strength and return to reclaim the mainland. They never did. And that failure, that permanent unfrozen, unfinished civil war, is the wound at the center of everything that follows, because Beijing has never accepted the result. To the government in Beijing, Taiwan is not a country. It is a province that has not yet come home. That claim, made as a defeated leader fled across the strait in 1949, is still the single most dangerous, unresolved sentence in the Pacific today, more than 75 years later. But the Taiwan of 1949 was not a technological power. It was poor, agricultural, crowded with millions of refugees who had crossed the water with almost nothing. It had no oil, no great mineral wealth, no obvious path to relevance. What it had was a government terrified of disappearing. And that fear, strange as it sounds, turned out to be one of the most productive forces in modern economic history. Because a place that believes it might be erased will do almost anything to make itself indispensable to people more powerful than itself. Over the next 3 decades, Taiwan did something almost no developing economy has ever managed. It climbed. First textiles, then plastics, then simple electronics, radios, calculators, the cheap assembled goods of a rising Asia. The government poured resources into education, into engineering, into building technical institutes and research labs. It sent its brightest minds abroad to American universities and American companies to learn at the frontier. And then, this was the crucial part, it found ways to bring them home, to bring that knowledge back across the Pacific. For years, it worked quietly, unglamorously. Taiwan became a place that made things well and made them cheaply. But making other people's products on thin margins is not power. The leadership knew it. They wanted something the world could not take away. They wanted to own a piece of the future that no one else could easily build. And then, in 1987, one decision changed the trajectory of the entire planet. The Taiwanese government, working through a state-backed research institute, recruited a 55-year-old engineer who had spent 25 years climbing the ranks of the American semiconductor industry. His name was Morris Chang. He was born in mainland China, educated in the United States, and had risen near the very top of one of America's great technology companies, only to be passed over for its highest job. Now Taiwan offered him something larger than a promotion. It offered him a blank page, build us a semiconductor industry from almost nothing. What Chang built was not just a company, it was a new idea about how the entire industry could work, and it is the reason this story exists at all. Until that moment, the great chip companies of the world did 2 things under one roof. They designed their chips and they manufactured them. Intel designed and built. Motorola designed and built. Owning the factory was the whole point. The factory was the empire, the moat, the proof that you were serious. Chang saw something almost everyone else had missed. He realized you could split the 2 apart. You could build a company that designed nothing of its own and competed with no one. A company that existed only to manufacture, with absolute precision, the designs that other companies brought to it. He called it a foundry, a pure play foundry, a factory for hire that would never become your rival, never steal your ideas, never launch a product to compete with the very customers who trusted it with their designs. The most important company on Earth is not Apple. It is the company almost no one outside the industry could have named 20 years ago. The one Morris Chang built on that island in 1987. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, because that single decision to manufacture and never compete unlocked something extraordinary. It meant a brilliant young engineer with a chip design and no factory could suddenly build a real company. They didn't need $10 billion in a fabrication plant of their own. They just needed an idea, and TSMC would turn it into silicon. An entire generation of the companies you now depend on, the famous names that design the chips inside your devices, exists because TSMC agreed to be the factory and never the competitor. It removed the single largest barrier to entry in the most important industry of the age. The student became the foundation. And the world, without quite noticing what it was doing, began to build everything on top of it. To understand why no one can simply replace Taiwan, you first have to understand what actually happens inside one of these factories. And it is stranger and more astonishing than most people imagine. A modern semiconductor fab is the most precise manufacturing environment human beings have ever created. The air inside is filtered until it is roughly 10,000 times cleaner than a hospital operating room. A single speck of dust, a particle far too small to see, can ruin a chip worth thousands of dollars. The workers move through it in full protective suits, not to protect themselves from the chips, but to protect the chips from them, from the skin and hair and breath of the humans who tend the machines. Inside, the equipment works in near-perfect silence, in light filtered to protect the chemistry of the process, etching patterns so small they are measured against the width of individual atoms. The current leading edge is called the 2 nanometer node. To give that a sense of scale, a single human hair is around 80,000 nanometers across. The features TSMC now prints are just a small number of nanometers wide. We have reached the point where the company is no longer really shrinking transistors in the old, familiar sense. It is arranging matter at a scale that is closing in on the size of atoms themselves. This is manufacturing at the absolute edge of what physics permits. In late 2025, TSMC began volume production of that 2 nanometer generation, its first move away from the basic transistor design the industry had relied on for over a decade, toward a new structure that wraps the transistor's gate completely around the channel, giving tighter control and wasting less power. The next refinements of that generation, including a version that delivers power from the backside of the wafer to squeeze out still more performance, are scheduled to ramp through the second half of 2026. The roadmap keeps moving. The lead keeps extending. Here is what matters about all of that. It is not just that TSMC can do this, it is that at the very leading edge, almost no one else can do it at the same scale, with the same reliability, at the same moment in time. There are perhaps a small handful of organizations on Earth that can even attempt this class of manufacturing, and only one that does it at volume for the whole world. Now look at who is standing in line for that capability. When Apple designs the processor inside its newest iPhone and its Mac computers, it does not build that chip. It sends the design to Taiwan. When NVIDIA, the company whose chips have become the engine of the entire artificial intelligence boom, the company whose hardware trains nearly every frontier AI model, designs those processors, it does not build them either. It sends them to Taiwan. AMD, whose chips run inside data centers and game consoles and laptops around the world, Taiwan. Qualcomm, whose chips sit inside an enormous share of the world's smartphones, Taiwan. Broadcom, the quiet giant inside the networking hardware that moves the internet itself, Taiwan. The most valuable technology companies on the planet, companies worth, together, many trillions of dollars, share a single, common, physical dependency. The brilliant designs are mostly American. The manufacturing is Taiwanese. And the designs, however ingenious, are worth nothing. Literally nothing. Just numbers in a file, until someone on that island turns them into silicon you can hold in your hand. Nobody can replace Taiwan, and it is not only the factories. Around those fabs has grown an entire ecosystem that took 40 years to assemble. The specialized suppliers, the chemical makers, the tool makers, the universities feeding a steady stream of engineers, the dense web of firms that can solve a problem at 3 a.m. because they are 20 minutes away. That ecosystem cannot be ordered from a catalog or summoned by a subsidy. It is the slow sediment of decades, laid down in one place, and it is at least as hard to copy as the machines themselves. Not quickly, not cheaply, not without years of effort that have only just begun. And to understand why, you have to follow the dependency one layer deeper, because TSMC, the company the whole world depends on someone too. There is exactly one company in the world that makes the machines required to print chips at the leading edge. It is not American. It is not Taiwanese. It is Dutch. Its name is ASML, and it sits in a small town in the Netherlands, and it holds something close to a perfect monopoly on the single most important tool in all of modern manufacturing. Not a dominant share. Not a comfortable lead. The whole thing. The machine is called an extreme ultraviolet lithography system. Each one contains well over 100,000 individual components. Each one costs somewhere between roughly $150 and $400 million, and is shipped in pieces in dozens of crates and assembled on site over months. To print a pattern small enough for an advanced chip, the machine fires tiny droplets of molten tin and vaporizes them with a laser 50,000 times a second to produce a precise and otherworldly wavelength of light. It then focuses that light using mirrors so flawlessly smooth that, if one were scaled up to the size of an entire continent, its largest bump would be only a few millimeters high. It is, by some measures, the most complex machine that human beings have ever mass-produced. Take a breath and look at the structure we have just built. The world's technology runs on advanced chips. The advanced chips are made at the leading edge overwhelmingly by one company. That one company depends in turn on lithography machines made by exactly one other company. And the most advanced of those machines have never been sold to China at all. The Netherlands, under heavy and sustained pressure from Washington, has blocked their export since 2019. So the modern world does not rest on a broad, stable foundation. It rests on a tower of single points of failure. One island, one foundry, one machine maker. Pull any one of them out, and the entire structure above it begins to tremble. We have never, in the history of industrial civilization, concentrated so much essential capability into so few hands, and most of the people who depend on it have no idea. And that brings us to the heart of the problem. Because the natural reaction, the comforting and very American one, is to say, fine, then we'll simply build it somewhere else. We design these chips. We can surely build the factories too. Pour in the money, pour in the engineers, bring it home where it's safe. It is a reasonable thought. It is also exactly where the real story begins. Because the problem, it turns out, was never the money. The problem is time. A leading-edge fab is not a building you fill with machines and switch on. It is a decade of accumulated, hard-won, almost impossible to transfer knowledge, the kind that lives not in any manual, but in the hands and instincts of the engineers who have made 10,000 tiny corrections that were never written down. You can buy the machines from the Dutch. You can pour the concrete. You can hire brilliant people. What you cannot simply buy is the 20 years of accumulated failure and refinement that taught one specific workforce on one specific island how to make this actually work at scale, reliably, today. And the country that understands that better than anyone is the United States. For decades, America watched the most strategically important manufacturing capability on Earth migrate steadily across the Pacific, and did almost nothing. The chips were cheap, the supply was reliable, the arrangement worked beautifully for everyone involved. Why interfere with something that works? Why spend tens of billions building at home what you could buy, flawlessly, from a trusted partner abroad? Then a series of shocks arrived in quick succession, and the comfortable logic fell apart. A pandemic froze global supply chains and idled automobile factories across America and Europe for want of a few dollars worth of chips. Grown men in hard hats standing in empty plants because a component the size of a fingernail had stopped arriving. The artificial intelligence boom turned advanced semiconductors into the single most contested strategic resource on the planet, the thing nations now compete for the way they once competed for oil. And the tension across the Taiwan Strait stopped looking theoretical and started looking like a countdown. Washington did the arithmetic and arrived at a conclusion that genuinely frightened it. The United States, the country that invented the semiconductor that designs the most advanced chips in the world, had allowed its single most critical technological dependency to concentrate almost entirely in the one place on Earth most exposed to a direct confrontation with a rival superpower. It had built the brain of its economy in someone else's house within reach of someone else's army. So America moved, with money and with restrictions. Two strategies at once. The money came through landmark legislation that committed roughly $50 billion in federal funding to rebuild semiconductor manufacturing on American soil. TSMC itself was persuaded to build in the Arizona desert, a project that has now swelled into one of the largest foreign investments in American history, anchored by a finalized federal grant of several $billion and the promise of billions more in loans. And it is real. The first Arizona fab is now running, producing advanced chips for Apple and for NVIDIA's AI processors on American ground for the very first time. And here is the genuinely surprising part, the part that cuts hard against the conventional wisdom. For years, the experts, serious people, including some inside the industry, insisted that advanced chips simply could not be made profitably outside Taiwan. The costs were too high, the workforce too thin, the ecosystem too far away. Then TSMC's first Arizona fab reported a profit in its very first full year of mass production. And in the opening months of 2026 alone, that same facility earned more than it had in that entire first year. The thing the experts had called impossible turned out to be merely difficult. But difficult, in this story, is the whole point. Read the timeline carefully, and the comfort drains right back out of you. Because the first Arizona fab produces an advanced node, but not the leading edge, not the most advanced chips Taiwan is making right now. The second fab, the one built to make more advanced chips, only begins installing its equipment around the middle of 2026, with production pulled forward, optimistically, to 2027. The fab beyond that, the one meant to reach the true leading edge, the 2 nanometer class, is not expected to be in production until close to the end of the decade. Sit with that. Even with tens of billions of dollars, even with the active cooperation of the most capable foundry on Earth, even with a finished building standing in the desert waiting for its machines, America is still looking at years before its own soil can make at full scale the chips that Taiwan is making at full scale today. And those American-made chips, when they finally arrive, are expected to cost meaningfully more than the identical chips made in Taiwan. Reshoring is happening. It is simply happening slowly and at a premium. Even America cannot replace Taiwan quickly. The other half of America's strategy is quieter, and in some ways far more revealing. If you cannot bring the capability home fast enough, you can at least try to stop your rival from building its own. So the United States has spent years tightening an intricate net of export controls, rules designed to keep the most advanced chips and the machines that make them out of China's hands. The logic is cold and simple. Slow the competitor while you race to catch up at home. That net has tightened and loosened and tightened again, almost quarter by quarter, as administrations weigh security against commerce. Earlier in 2026, Washington shifted its stance on certain high-end artificial intelligence chips, moving from a near-total ban toward case-by-case approval under strict conditions, paired with new tariffs on imported semiconductors. Then, within months, it moved to close the loopholes again, clarifying that the rules followed Chinese companies even to their subsidiaries based outside China. The single most advanced manufacturing machines, the ones from the Netherlands, remain blocked entirely. And even there, in the middle of 2026, came an unverified alarm, a claim from a senior American official that one of those forbidden machines might somehow have reached China. The machine's maker flatly and publicly denied it, stating it had no indication that any such system was anywhere on Chinese soil. Step back from all the detail, and the meaning becomes clear. This is not ordinary trade policy, the back and forth of tariffs and quotas. This is two superpowers locked in a struggle over a single, narrow, irreplaceable capability. One trying to defend its lead, the other trying to break free of a dependence it finds intolerable. And the prize they are circling, the object at the center of the whole contest, sits on an island that one of them claims as its own, and the other cannot afford to lose. Which raises the question that has been waiting in the dark since the very beginning of the story. What happens if the fight stops being economic and becomes something else entirely? Let us be careful here, because this is the part of the story where it is easiest to lose discipline. And discipline is exactly what the subject demands. Nothing in what follows is a prediction. No one narrating from the outside knows what Beijing will or will not do, and anyone who claims certainty is selling something. What we can do, what serious analysts at the institutions that study this for a living actually do, is examine the scenarios, weigh the mechanics, and trace the consequences. So treat everything in this block as exactly that. A careful look at what could happen, not a forecast that it will. Begin with what we can observe because it is real and it is documented. Across 2025 and into 2026, the pressure around Taiwan has been escalating in a pattern analysts call gray zone coercion, actions deliberately calibrated to fall just short of open war. Military aircraft crossing the unofficial line down the middle of the strait, again and again, until the crossing itself becomes routine. Naval patrols circling the island, Coast Guard vessels pressing against Taiwan's outlying islands, testing how Taipei responds. In early 2026, a Chinese military drone flew over a Taiwanese-held island, by several accounts the first violation of Taiwan's airspace by such an aircraft in decades. China's announced military budget for 2026 climbed past $270 billion. None of this is hidden. All of it is a message written slowly in a language both sides understand. Now, the scenario that keeps analysts awake at night is not the one most people picture. The image in the public mind is an invasion, a vast amphibious assault, thousands of soldiers storming beaches, the largest seaborne military operation since the Second World War. That scenario is real, and it would be catastrophic, and it is also, by most serious assessments, the hardest, slowest, and riskiest option available to Beijing. An invasion across 100 miles of rough water against a defended island is one of the most difficult operations in all of warfare. There is a quieter option, and it may be the more dangerous one precisely because it is so much easier to begin. A blockade. Would an invasion even be necessary? Consider what it would take simply to surround the island, to declare a zone, to turn away or board, and inspect the ships that approach, to slowly choke the flow of fuel and goods and components into one of the most trade-dependent economies on Earth. No beaches stormed, no territory seized, no dramatic moment of invasion to rally the world against. Just a slow, deliberate tightening of a noose around an island that imports most of its energy and exports the lifeblood of the entire global technology industry. Watch what happens next, because the chips themselves never have to be touched for the damage to spread across the world. The first thing that moves is maritime insurance. The moment the waters around Taiwan are judged unsafe, the cost of insuring a ship to sail there spikes or simply vanishes altogether. And without insurance, the great container vessels and oil tankers do not sail. Their owners will not risk a $400 million ship and its cargo into a war zone. The shipping stops before a single shot is fired. This is not speculation about some imagined future. It is how shipping has responded to risk in every conflict in living memory. The insurance market is the quiet switch that turns global trade on and off. Then the shortage begins to radiate outward, and here the tower of dependence we built earlier comes due, all at once. The world's car makers, who learned during the pandemic just how completely they depend on chips, begin idling assembly lines again for want of components. The companies racing to build artificial intelligence discover that the supply of the most advanced processors, the ones made in only one place on Earth, has been severed at the source. Consumer electronics, networking hardware, medical devices, the defense industry itself, whose most advanced weapon systems are packed with the very same silicon. One by one, the systems the modern economy treats as background, as guaranteed, as simply there, begin to falter. Economists who have tried to model the cost of a serious disruption to Taiwan's chip output keep arriving at numbers that are genuinely difficult to hold in the mind. Losses to the global economy measured not in billions but in trillions of dollars, dwarfing the disruption of the pandemic, dwarfing even the financial crisis of a generation ago. And these are estimates, carrying all the uncertainty that word implies. Reasonable people argue over the exact figures. But the direction is not in dispute. A serious blow to Taiwan's chip production would be one of the largest economic shocks in the entire history of the modern world. A war may never happen. A blockade would be enough. And this is the strange, dark logic sitting at the center of the whole situation. Beijing may never need to fire a single shot to remind the world how much power runs through that one island. The mere credible threat of disruption is itself a form of leverage over Taiwan, over the United States, over every economy that has quietly, thoughtlessly outsourced its technological foundation to a place it does not control and cannot defend on its own. which forces us, finally, to confront the question this entire story has been circling from the very first minute. If Taiwan is this important, if losing it would be this catastrophic for everyone, including, in the end, for the very power applying the pressure, then what exactly has been keeping it safe all this time? There is a phrase for the answer. It is not an official policy. You will not find it written into any treaty or signed into any law. But it captures, better than anything else, the thing that has quietly protected this island for a generation. They call it the Silicon Shield. The idea is this: Taiwan is not ultimately protected by its army, formidable as that army is. It is not protected only by the distant conditional promise of American support. It is protected by something stranger and, in its way, far more powerful. It is protected by the simple fact that the entire world needs it to keep working. To strike Taiwan, to blockade it, to damage those factories, would be to detonate the global economy from the inside. To sever the supply of the one component that every advanced nation, including the very nation applying the pressure, now depends on to function. China itself runs on these chips. A blow to Taiwan's fabs would land, in part, squarely on Beijing. So the shield is not made of steel or soldiers, it is made of dependence. The island is too important to attack, because it is too important to break. Its greatest defense is how much everyone needs it intact. And if you pull far enough back, far enough to see the whole shape of it, you realize we have seen this pattern before. Not these machines, but this exact logic repeating across the centuries. Every age has had its critical infrastructure, the hidden thing the whole civilization quietly stood upon. There was an age when whoever controlled the railroads controlled the movement of armies, the price of grain, the fate of entire nations, when a few iron lines decided who rose and who starved. There was an age when whoever controlled the oil controlled the century itself, when wars were fought and empires rose and fell over the right to pump it, ship it, and burn it. The infrastructure changes from age to age, the underlying logic never does. Whoever holds the choke point of the age holds a kind of power that no flag and no army can fully replace. Today, that choke point is the ability to manufacture intelligence itself, to print the silicon on which every other system now runs, the silicon that thinks for us, drives for us, and increasingly decides for us. And it has concentrated against every instinct of caution and prudence into a single fragile point on the map. There is a kind of madness in it when you say it plainly. The most advanced civilization in human history, a civilization that prides itself on managing risk, on hedging, on never putting everything in one place, built the foundation of its entire economy on one island, within reach of one rival, dependent on one company, which depends on one machine maker, an ocean away. No one designed it this way on purpose. It happened the way most fragile systems happen, one reasonable decision at a time, each cheaper and easier than the alternative until the redundancy was gone and no one could remember choosing to remove it. But here is the final, uncomfortable truth, the one the Silicon Shield does not want you to notice. The shield is weakening. Every fab America raises in the Arizona desert, every $1 billion poured into bringing the capability home, every machine installed in a new plant in Japan or Europe, every advance that lets another nation make these chips for itself. Each one, by design, makes Taiwan a little less irreplaceable than it was the year before. And the day the world no longer needs this island the way it needs it now is the day the shield made of dependence quietly dissolves. The very effort to make the world safer from this dependency may, in the end, make the island that holds it less safe. That is the paradox the people of Taiwan now live inside, whether they ever chose it or not, protected by the world's need for them, and slowly being unprotected as that need is engineered away. Civilization built its mind on a single island, and now, slowly, nervously, at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars, it is trying to build a second mind somewhere else, without anyone quite knowing what will become of the first one once it is no longer the only one. So the next time you unlock your phone, or watch a car drive itself down a highway, or read a sentence that was written by a machine, remember that all of it begins in the same place, a few buildings on an island the size of a small American state, behind glass and filtered air, where the modern world is quietly printed into existence one wafer at a time. Modern civilization runs on silicon, and the place that makes the silicon is, for now, the single most important and most exposed piece of real estate on the planet, a choke point we built ourselves and only recently noticed we had built. But silicon is only half of the story, because once the chips are made, the intelligence they carry has to travel across oceans, between continents, into the vast data centers that run our world. And it does not travel through the air the way most people quietly assume. It travels down. Below the waves, beneath the surface of every ocean, lies a hidden web of cables, many of them no thicker than a garden hose, lying in the cold and the dark on the floor of the sea. Through those thin strands of glass moves the overwhelming majority of the world's international data, its money, its messages, its secrets, the entire nervous system of the connected age carried in pulses of light along the seabed. Almost no one guards them. If a handful of fabs on one small island can hold the world's economy hostage, what happens when someone reaches, deliberately, for the cables resting on the ocean floor? The next invisible choke point hidden in the deep, where almost no one is watching, and almost no one can reach in time. Every system that ever dominated the world eventually had to answer the same question. What comes after?